Good morning. I'm John Cole, Chair of the NYPA Canal's Board of Trustees and acting or interim Chair of Finance Committee. And hence I'm very pleased to welcome you and my fellow committee members to this joint Finance Committee. Today, our fellow board and committee members, Dennis Trainer, Lori Wheelock, Lewis Warren, Cecily Morris, Mike Cusick is in transit. Expect to have him join us shortly. B. Gonzalez has been excused, and we have a number of NYPA and Canal Corporation staff, in addition to Justin and Adam, and duly welcome them as well. This meeting has otherwise been appropriately noticed as required by open meetings law, and hence pleased to call the meeting to order. We've all had the opportunity to review the agenda and materials in advance, and unless there's any questions or proposed amendments, I'd ask for a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Thanks, Cecily. Have a second?
Second by Wheelock.
Thanks. Thank you, Lori. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carried. Agenda has been adopted. As we typically do, we have a very full and robust agenda today with a number of important items. That said, we will follow our typical path, which is start our meeting in executive session to further the discussion pursuant to Section 105 of the Public Officers Law. We'll do our best to keep that moving, but in this case, I do expect we're going to spend a good hour and a half in exec session, and we will be back in public session as soon as possible thereafter. So if I could, I ask for a motion to conduct an executive session pursuant to Section 105 of the Public Officers Law.
So moved by Wheelock.
Thank you, Lori. Have a second?
Second by Warren.
Thank you, Laura. Lewis, all in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. We will move to executive session. Hello again. We're back. Appreciate the patience, and hopefully you've had the opportunity to rejoin us. I'd like to start with a motion to resume the meeting in open session.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Cecily. Have a second?
Second.
Second.
All right, thanks, Michael. All in favor? Aye.
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 All right, any opposed? Motion carries.
Aye.
As always, no votes were taken while we were in executive session. We've all had an opportunity not only to review the agenda and materials, but review the list of potential conflicts. And I think we've duly advised Karen of those. I know Lewis got a couple matters on which you're going to recuse yourself, so that's duly noted. Does anyone else have any additions or changes to that? If not, I'm pleased to move forward and now convene our meeting as proposed. So we've got a full and robust agenda. And as always, our CFO, distinguished leader, Adam Barsky, will kick us off.
Good morning, trustees and NYPA colleagues and members of the public. What we'll do today is just give a quick update as to where we are through July year to date on our financials, according to our financial plan. July was a good month for us, as well as we're getting numbers in now. August as well. The summer heat worked to our advantage. So we actually are trying to help close some of the gap we had from earlier in the year. As you can see, we're tracking well to plan, particularly the fact that we started out the year very much behind plan, given the drop in energy prices and the weather being warmer than normal in January. So we've been able to narrow that gap And Chairman, I want to point out to you that you asked a question last time about some of the variances from budget to actuals. What I try to point out was some of that was really caused by the pass-through costs because of the energy prices. But, you know, when you take those out, the variances aren't really as great as they had appeared on a consolidated view. And if you see on this report, we did break out those pass-through costs, so you could really see the impact of that when it's, you know, removed from the rest of the numbers. But that being said,
I appreciate that. Very helpful. Thank you.
Welcome. But as we, you know, we are narrowing the gap in terms of operating performance, operating income, coming much closer to plan and exceeding plan in the non-operating, mostly because of interest income. The rise in interest rates has been very favorable for our investment portfolio, and we generated significantly more interest income than was planned, given the rise in interest rates. And we continue to position the portfolio to take advantage of that for the next few years ahead as best we can. Turning to the full year forecast, we are expected to go beyond our planned target by almost $30 million. Again, some of that driven by that non-operating income of the higher interest rates and the income, interest income doing better on our securities portfolio, but also continue to narrow the gap on the operating side in terms of our margins. Our merchant margin should actually come in on target or slightly above. Some of the customer margins are slightly lower. Some of it has to do with the renegotiation of a long-term agreement with our C&E customers. There was some reduction in costs there beyond what we had originally in the plan. And some of the non-utility revenues might be delayed based on some projects that were expected to happen this year that are getting pushed to next year. So more of a timing issue than anything else on that end. On the operating side, you know, operations and maintenance costs are in line with budget and forecast. We've had a couple of emergent issues at some of the plants that required some additional maintenance than was not anticipated. As I mentioned last month, we had, or, you know, we are expecting now higher pension expense than was originally forecast, given the fact that the state's investment portfolio at the end of March performed significantly under their benchmark of 5.9%. They were negative 2% for the year. So in a normal year, our pension expense would be in the $30 to $35 million range. This year, the bill for that looks to be around $63 million. So a significant increase in costs for our pension expense, something that we really don't have control over. But all that being said, we continue to forecast that we'll be above plan for the year. And so that's good news for providing all the funds we need to support our capital plan and all of our strategic priorities. Are there any questions on that? And I'll have a further update for the full board meeting of the results through August. But I would say that I don't think our forecast will change that much to the end of the year. So what you're looking at today is still our current view to the end of the year.
So
Any questions?
net, you've got a more positive view of the back half of the year than the first half of the year. I mean, the numbers reflect some improvement in operating trends, and there's nothing at this point that gives you significant pause, Adam, as you look ahead at least till year end.
No, I think that's correct what you said. You know, in terms of energy prices, they are still depressed, you know, given the price of natural gas, despite what oil has been doing, you know, recently, but still lower than what had been originally planned or forecast in the forward curves. But that being said, one of the things that's offsetting that are larger revenues from capacity as well as ancillary services. And this has to do with, you know, the change in the mix of generation facilities in the state. So as some gas-fired plants are coming offline because of the NOx rules and more intermittent sources are coming in, the value and the need for our ancillary services to be there for things like black start or, you know, other reserve needs for the system, the value of that has gone up. So we've received more revenue for that, as well as, you know, capacity prices overall, given the fact that some of these plants are being retired and happening faster than the new renewable sources are being injected into the system. So we see some benefit from that. But other than that, we don't see anything significantly on the horizon that should change our view of the how we do towards the end of the year.
Justin, can you do me a favor and have somebody send a tech guy in to the conference room for me? Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, Adam, go ahead.
Sure.
Anything else for
So
Adam?
if there are,
All right, move on to the bond issuance. Adam, please.
sure. So the next topic is, we're here today to request that the Finance Committee recommends to the full board the approval of a bond issuance for the Smart Path Connect project, and to be issued through as a separately financed project, not backed by NYPA credit, but backed by the credit of the project, particularly the regulatory order behind it and those revenues. Next slide, please. But just to set the stage here in terms of our strategic priorities, being, after protecting the value of our hydro, the next significant priority is really being the leading developer and owner-operator of transmission assets throughout the state, and rebuilding the grid and building out the grid to enable the renewables to move throughout the state from where they're being generated to where they're needed, in this case, from upstate to downstate. But that is our strategic priority, and the project we're talking about is in line with a continuation of that vision. Next slide, please. The Smart Path Connect project is a project about 1.4 billion of that. NYPA's share is a little over 800 million. It goes through our rights of way as well as the rights of way of National Grid, who is our partner on the project. The project involves rebuilding the transmission lines to have it to be a 345 kV line, which will increase its capacity and be able to move roughly 1,000 megawatts of renewable power from upstate to downstate. Requires also the rebuilding of certain substations and building of new substations. So all of that is included as part of the project, and gets to that cost of around $800 million, or potentially a little more when you factor in contingency. But in terms of the benefits of the project, you can see in the lower right-hand box that the benefits exceed the cost by a ratio of 4.75 to 1. A lot of that has to do with reducing those congestion costs that would be incurred if you were trying to move that power without these upgrades, but significant value to the ratepayers overall from just this project. Next. And then just to put it in context of our overall plan, I mean, this project will have a payback period of 2 years in terms of its savings to its overall cost. But if you look at our entire transmission revenue requirement, that has an impact of about $3 per megawatt hour to ratepayer bills. But when we take into account the benefits from not only this project, but the other two we financed last year, similarly through the SFP structure, the separately financed structure, that will generate over $6 per megawatt hour savings to the ratepayer, with a net reduction of about $3 per megawatt hour net savings. When you include all of our costs to the ratepayers and all the benefits of these projects, the net of all that is it will reduce the ratepayers' burden, as well as be very positive for the environment. It will reduce our scope 2 emissions because of line loss and other benefits. So it's going to be good for the environment, good towards state goals, and good for the ratepayer. Next. So today, what we're asking for authorization is for the ability to issue up to $800 million of project revenue bonds, which will be 100% green bonds, which we've been a leader in that area. We had issued the largest green bond of public power to date in the past, and where the interest costs all in not to exceed 5.25%. That's a cap. We hope to come in lower than that, of course, and we That is our plan, and to authorize the release of $115 million from NYPA into the SFP, which would represent our equity interest in the project and cover any other contingencies that might arise between now and project completion 2025. The project is already full, permitted in terms of having its Article 7 permit. It's got the abandonment incentive from FERC and all the things in place that we required before we move it into this structure for financing. Almost $300 million has been spent to date on the project. So when we do finance the project, that $300 million will be reimbursed to NYPA to fund NYPA's capital plan and then finish the project from here on out, managed separately over in the SFP. The ratings on the project are very strong, given the strength of the regulatory order and the understanding of how that works. Again, it's basically a securitization of the rates coming out of the NYSO based on that regulatory order, so that we don't require NYPA's credit to be used to finance this project. So it allows NYPA's credit to have more dry powder for its state of good repair projects, as well as other capital needs for NYPA. So this helps us expand our capital capacity roughly about $2 billion if we didn't have this financing structure in place and available to us. So it gives us that benefit as well. At this point, I would ask for any other questions regarding the bond issuance and the authorization being sought today in terms of the recommendation from the Finance Committee to the full board.
I apologize, Adam, if I missed it when I stepped out. In terms of your assessment of the market, and you had great execution 15 months ago, your expectations this time around?
So I think what I would say is that obviously interest rates have gone up, as you know, since we issued last time, almost in excess of 500 basis points. The Fed has raised rates, more in a short amount of time than they have done historically in quite some time. So that has an impact overall on all of the market. That being said, because we're issuing long-term bonds, we have an inverted yield curve today, which means that the rates in the shorter part of the curve, within say 1 to 10 years, are actually higher than longer rates in many cases. So while the whole curve has moved up, the long part of the curve where we're issuing more of our bonds has not seen the same rate increase that we've seen at the front end of the curve. So that benefits us in terms of not having that significant increase of a cost. That being said, we're also going to be issuing, I believe, a tighter credit spread to the curve than we did last year. And that is somewhat supply and demand driven, particularly for projects like this, which is for public power, which is a necessity, essential service, and quite valued in the marketplace, as that investors like and understand. The green designation does help investor appetite as well to have green bonds in their portfolio. And particularly in New York, where a lot of the bond funds need to have significant amounts of New York bonds, because we are not as big of an issuer as, say, the state or New York City. Many investors have reached their allocation limits in many cases of those names and those bonds. So there will be, I think, significant demand for our paper being more of a scarce resource. So we'll benefit from that scarcity aspect in terms of supply and demand. So we do expect on a relative basis, to even outperform what our credit rating would suggest. Last year we had a similar dynamic, and I expect to see even that more so this time around, as well as significant interest from retail investors that we will be marketing to as well.
Great, appreciate that. Lori.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Adam. I had two questions. The first was about the interest rate, so that's already been taken care of, so thank you so much. Second question just has to do with NYPA's credit rating. Adam, can you just walk us through briefly how that's changed over the last, year, and, the rating right now, and how we're looking as we go into the end of 2023?
Thank you for that question. So, our ratings for NYPA's general bonds, general resolution bonds, are a very strong, AA rating across the board from all the major rating agencies. We have, actually 4 right now. And recently Moody's not only upgraded the SFP bonds, which are rated a little bit lower. We have a sort of an average rate there, a notch lower at AA minus, but they increased their rating on those bonds. But on the general bonds for NYPA, they increased our outlook from stable to positive, which is actually considered a notch higher and a notch before you would get to a AA plus or equivalent from them. So we do see ourselves heading in that direction with respect to that rating agency. We do believe that we are, a strong AA credit, and in many cases argued that it's even stronger for AA plus. So we continue to make those arguments, and that means that we need to maintain all of our coverage metrics for debt service coverage ratios, fixed charge coverage ratios, the amount of cash we have available at any time, our ability to manage and execute projects goes into that rating as well. Recently, KBRA rated NYPA as well as a AA. But what was important in that analysis that I shared with the members here is that they rated our financials as a AA plus, as well as quality of management as a AA plus in regard to that overall AA rating. I think that was a great testament to the work of the people, that we have at NYPA throughout the organization, both in operations, project execution, financial management, et cetera. Overall management was viewed as being very strong here. So all good, responses from the rating agencies through this process.
Thank you, Adam.
Any other questions? Cecily, Michael, Louis, Dennis, or Adam on the bond issuance? Obviously an important project, an exciting project, and another example of the creative funding and financing strategies that Adam and his team have been able to execute and implement. If not, I'd ask for a motion to recommend this item to the full board next week for adoption.
So moved by Wheelock.
Thanks very much, Laurie. A second? Second, Louis. All right. And unless there's any other questions, all in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carried. All right, terrific. We look forward to having you keep us updated, Adam, on another strong execution. All right, Canal.
Sure, and just
releasing another.
Well, before Chairman, before we go there, just in terms of just checking the boxes here, I just want to make it clear that the board is voting for both the issuance of the bonds as well as the project authorization of up to $830 million, the release of $115 million towards the project, that those are all being approved as part of this overall authorization. I just want to make it clear on the record that you're approving the issuance of the bonds, the total authorization for the project costs, and the release of funds from NYPA into the SFP in order to issue the bonds.
Correct. Understood. We've got it. All right. Release of additional funding support of canals. You want to cover that as well?
Yes, yep. Thank you, Chairman. I think as the trustees know, every quarter we need to release the money that we do spend on the canals. What that means is just like we release the money for the SFP, we have to determine before spending any money on canals that NYPA doesn't need the money to pay its debt service, maintain its debt service coverage ratio of 2.0 before or after releasing the money, and that NYPA's generation and transmission operation and maintenance costs and requirements have all been met, so that for any of the NYPA's core needs, all have been met and the money is not needed for those. Therefore, we can release it from the lien that the bondholders have on our revenues and allow it to be used for canals. That's the purpose of the release. And this is just showing that the amount we're authorizing is in keeping with the annual budget. And right now we do predict that the canals are operating at or below the run rate of the budget and should be fine with this release as we go to the end of the year.
And the canals, the operating season winds down in what, another 30 days or so?
October 11th, I believe.
Okay. All right. Well, unless there's any other questions, I'd ask for a motion to approve the release of the next quarter of funding for the benefit of canals. Motion, please.
Trustee Warren makes a motion.
Thanks, Louis. Second.
6 seconds.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it. Unless there's any other questions, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Motion carried. All right. Thanks very much, Adam.
Sure.
Pivot a bit to IT and our data management and operating in the clouds and all that good stuff. John Cabral is gonna kick us off here, it looks like.
Yes, I am, Mr. Chairman. So why don't we get to the first slide? So obviously, good morning, Mr. Chairman, trustees, and the public. I think first I should probably introduce myself. I am John Cabral, the Vice President of Digital Engineering, Architecture, and Operations here at NYPA. I'm here today to seek approval of the capital expenditure authorization for this project, which is obviously the data center cloud migration. However, before I begin and get into the specific request, I'd like to give you all some background on what this project entails, a little bit of the history, and more important, what's changing and what's not changing here at NYPA. This is a new technology. As the chairman noted, it's the IT stuff, but I think we all need to make sure that we're kind of familiar with where we're going and that we make an informed decision. So while what's changing, is important, I think more important right now is what's not changing. And what's not changing here is fundamentally one of the most important things here, which is NYPA's cybersecurity profile, which means that what we're doing with this project is not going to change, impact. In fact, it's going to enhance our cyber and security profile here, given that not only can we use our current tools that we have on premise today, with this solution, we're going to be able to actually leverage the vendor tools along with our current tools to be able to better protect NYPA's infrastructure, because it is infrastructure as a service, the data that resides on it, and the availability of the applications as we migrate them to the cloud. Also, what's not changing is our ability from a risk perspective in terms of our RTOs and RPOs. Layman's terms is the recovery time objective, which means if we get a cyber attack or something happens to our infrastructure, the time it takes us to actually recover the hardware, get the application back up and running, and enable the business functions to continue doing what they're supposed to be doing. The RPO is also that objective is very important here, because today we do obviously backups on a day-to-day basis. That's a 24 hours. So if something happens, we can go back to the data and pull it back. What's being enhanced here is that we're going to be able to go from an 24-hour recovery period, where the last thing you typed on your keyboard, for example, in SAP, we back it up tonight. If something happens, we'd have to go back to tomorrow. That's a 24-hour recovery objective. That's if it gets corrupted.
Back to tomorrow or go back to yesterday?
Well, yesterday. Today is tomorrow's yesterday. So I'm sorry.
You're operating in the future. You're in the clouds. I just didn't know if you were really out there.
So with that, Mr. Chairman, what we'll be able to do is actually now recover in 15-minute increments. So if we have a cyber attack, what's really important here is that we think we have down the ability to restore the systems, but what's equally important or better is the actual data that you're all using, that NYPA uses on a day-to-day basis. When this is fully implemented, we'll actually be able to go back, that if there was an attack and something got corrupted that you or a system put in there, we can just start going back in 15-minute increments to grab the best data that we have available to bring it forward. So it's a pretty impressive solution. And then obviously what's changing is our cloud first strategy. But what is changing? Simply put, as you look at this diagram, I know you had in the pre-read, you've probably been staring at what's the red mean. The red really means is that what's moving is the actual virtual machines that sit in our data center here in White Plains. We're going to be moving the virtual machines, not the physical machines, into this cloud solution that we've selected here. And we're going to be doing that over the network. And what's key here is another thing that's really not changing is the technology we use to encrypt and transmit the data between NYPA, its partners, and its current cloud. And in this solution, you can see here is it's private and secure, and it's encrypted, which means that our data is pretty protected moving in and out of the cloud and in and out of White Plains or our DR site in E2C2, which is the Emergency Energy Control Center. So with that, I think we can, if there's no questions, we can go to the next slide. So for all practical purposes, no good context and backstory is without a good timeline. And what we're really trying to say here is there's two really important things here. One of them is the timeline itself. We're just trying to emphasize here that this is not something new. This technology, I can tell you that not only has NYPA been doing it since 2009, in one of my previous roles, I'm somewhat new here at NYPA, about 3.5 years, is I previously worked for a Fortune 50 company, and we use this technology to migrate 19 data centers around the globe, literally in almost every continent except Antarctica, into 3 regional data centers. That along with the cloud technology, we were able to do this seamlessly, and I think that's the key for NYPA, which is the ability to do this without interrupting business operations. As you can see here in the colored blocks at top, what they really just represent is the generation. This right now, we're in the 2nd generation of this technology. The 3rd generation, which is in the yellow box, will be the migration off premises into a virtual managed cloud. So in essence, this is infrastructure as a service. The benefits, the backstory about the benefits is really that, as I mentioned before, it aligns to our Vision 2030 strategy. It maintains our SLAs. I think one of the critical things you all have to understand is our intellectual property and the investment we've made in people. We're really ensuring that investment since 2009, the training, the people are going to be enhanced because the technology is the same. It's just where we're operating this. The other benefit is that we're able to move where people's focus is to more value-added things because the vendor is going to maintain the hardware. Where this solution requires us to focusing on NYPA in terms of next generation innovation, next generation storage, looking at how we partner with IoT, except in terms of that. The one thing that I'll cover in the next slide in a little more detail is the cost avoidance of the $30 million of the refresh of the hardware. That is also something that we're going to be avoiding in the future. We're no longer going to have to buy the hardware, install it, get rid of the old hardware that sits in the data center. This is going to actually be done by the vendor, and that's part of the service. And the refresh, right now we do, as you can see, it's about a 4 to 5 year refresh on the hardware. By contract, that refresh will happen every 3 years with little or minimum effort on our part, just being aware that the back end's being flipped. There we go. So before I actually get into the detail, what I really want to say is that for us to get to this slide, to come in front of the Finance Committee, is really a culmination of a lot of team effort here and a very strict, I would say strict, but very valuable governance processes. We've learned a lot of things along the way. We've gone through the new enterprise PMO, partnering with finance, looking at the risk review committees, the actual risk committee itself. So it's gone through all of the governance, the review, the risk, the financial business cases. So this is sort of where we are today. What I'd like to say here is that although it's the background of what we're talking about, this slide really says is how did we get here? We got here because we have a presence here at NYPA in White Plains as far as the data center itself. We're looking for solutions in terms of what to do in the next generation as far as the data center. Right now, the data center was not bespoke, meaning it wasn't built as when the building was built as a data center. So it was retrofitted to become NYPA's, primary data center. That actually leads us to the fact that there are upgrades that we thought needed to be done to maintain its tiering level or its ability to maintain resiliency and redundancy. And there's some investments that at this point we're going to not need to make. And the reliability in terms of that investment will be actually done by the vendor and the service provider itself. So at this point, I mentioned before that this project will actually avoid a $30 million capital expenditure in terms of NYPA owning the hardware. And it allows us to maintain our security, our reliability and availability of the applications that support NYPA. So, at this point, I'd just like to get to the point is that we're looking for, additional funding of 15.8 million, given that we had a pre-authorization of 1.5 million. So at that, I'll open it up to questions.
Thanks, John. I mean, is there any viable alternative? I mean, it seems like, I don't call it a no-brainer, but more than an appropriate path, but is there any other viable alternative that you debated? Perpetuating status quo?
Mr. Chairman, yes, there are other solutions out there besides the technology itself. We could have opted to continue to buy the capital and go to a colo, lease facilities, lease a data center. So that was also considered. The one thing about this solution is that it separates IT decisions to real estate decisions. So it frees IT from being in the way of making critical and capital business decisions from a real estate perspective. So we did take that into consideration. As far as the technology goes, there were other iterations of how much we would manage. This is infrastructure as a service. So we thought this was the right mix for us, NYPA, because we didn't want to reduce and relieve complete control given our focus as a utility. So this allows us to maintain the control we require in terms of our applications in cyber and security.
Lori?
Thank you. And just quick question, are we aware of any other state authorities, for instance, NYPA or any of the sister agencies that are looking to do a similar switch to cloud migration, or are we the first in the state?
As far as the cloud, I think that's a great question. So thank you for it. I think what we do need to kind of consider here is that we are already in the cloud. From the perspective of, we actually have software as a service. Some of the core applications we use today are actually already in the cloud. If we went all the way back to the slide that had the diagram of on-premise versus in the cloud, today, some of our applications that we use are already provided by software as a service. We already have platform as a service or software as a service as far as some of the tools that we use to support NYPA. In fact, one of the risk applications is hosted today as a software as a service. I don't know if that answered your question.
But in terms of whether we're on the front end of this kind of migration versus other state agencies, that's something you guys can look at and come back to us.
Yes, Rob's going to chime in.
Yeah, this is Rob Piasek. Again, thanks for the question. So there are other agencies and like ITS and our partners, they also have what is known as a hybrid cloud environment. So they use some Google services, AWS, some of the other flavors, if you will, of cloud. So like us, they're rationalizing their application portfolio as it relates to support of other agencies, because they tend to be, call it an enterprise function. So they too are in the mix. So different agencies are at different points of maturity. But John brings up the key point. What's common across all is the fact that software as a service, most agencies are utilizing that pretty heavily and will continue.
Yeah, and I think that the key message here is that going to software as a service and native cloud is, we'll call it the most mature, most leading edge solution you have out there. In this case, we're only going, I would say, we're tempering our capability to maintain control. So this is kind of from not full software as a service. This is just infrastructure as a service. So this is less risky in terms of our journey in terms of X as a service, whether it's platform as a service, software as a service, or infrastructure as a service.
Thank you. That clarification is very, very helpful. For myself, being new to the board, hearing all of this is very helpful. The governance, all the considerations you all have put into this point to bring it to finance. So thank you.
You're quite welcome.
So our overall risk position, risk management within the context of data management, this puts us in a much better place, John. I mean, that's the punchline here. The return on our investment.
Yes, that it's equal or better in this case when it comes to the data protection / data recovery. It puts us in a much better position. We go from hours to minutes.
Right, we're going back to the future, you even told me, so.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for John? If not, I'd ask for a motion to recommend the data center cloud migration to the full board next week for adoption. Motion, please.
So moved by Wheelock.
Thank you, Lori. Have a second?
Second.
All right, thank you. Karen will sort that one out. Unless there's any other questions, all in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carried. All right, thanks very much, John. Appreciate that. Well done. Lisa's already popping up on my screen. So, Lisa, we've got an array of third-party vendors that provide support services that
Yes.
need to authorize some additional dollars to be spent over the next several years. The floor is yours.
Thank
The
you.
screen is yours.
Yes, the screen is mine. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Beaty, and I'm the Vice President of the Technology Business Management Office, and I'm here to present the second item from NYPA Information Technology today. So we're requesting approval to award 10 5-year technology services value contracts in the aggregate amount of $75 million to the firms that are listed on this slide. While their origin cities are not, that tend to vary, they all have locations in New York. The award is also contingent on negotiating terms and conditions that are satisfactory to the authority. As background, we have had some existing value contracts in place for the past several years, but these new contracts are different in that they expand the number of suppliers from 3 to 10, and they improve the opportunity to engage diverse suppliers by requiring commitment to NYPA's diversity goals. They also broaden the range of services being offered to better support NYPA and Canal's growing digital ecosystem. And the 5-year value contract period locks in pricing and rates for that period. These contracts provide us with flexibility to supplement our technology services with capacity and expertise, including certifications that we may require that we may not have in-house. The services under these contracts include, but aren't limited to, cyber, data, cloud expertise, as well as leading edge technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning. And these services will be utilized to support the portfolio of projects that NYPA and Canals has in support of meeting our Vision 2030 goals. And regarding our procurement process, we issued an RFP in February 2023 and received 59 proposals back in March. Those proposals were then evaluated by a cross-functional team, and each supplier was scored based on the following criteria: service capabilities and understanding of our scope and requirements, their experience in the New York tri-state area with government entities and in the utility industry, also the quality of the consulting firm and their proven experience in delivery, and the breadth and depth of experience, And finally, their infrastructure and their ability to respond and deliver quality services in a timely manner. The suppliers have all committed to meeting our supplier diversity goals of 10% minority owned, or 15% minority owned, 15% women owned, and 6% service disabled veteran owned. It's customary with these types of value contracts that we do a mini bid competitive process amongst these suppliers when projects have been identified and scoped. And the funding for those projects is awarded through our annual budget process and is included in the long range work plan. So at this time, I'll take any questions you may have.
As for the benefit of new trustees, I mean, my 2 cents are, as you'll see, even in the next item with Garish, this is a typical approach where, as Lisa just reframed the process to pre-qualify service providers that enables more ready access of services on an as needed basis. We put a ring fence around who and how much and all the rest of that. And then it's to the discretion of the management team as to how they tap into and utilize those resources. So this is a customary arrangement, as you will otherwise see that comes before us. Lisa, in terms of these 10, we've worked with these 10 before, or are there new providers here?
We have actually worked with, I think, all but one, which is the BJSS. But everyone else, we have in some capacity worked with them, either under the previous value contracts that we had or other value contracts that existed across NYPA.
So my focus would then be on the one, and then I got another thought. So how hard is it to crack the lineup in terms of, you know, new vendors, new providers, and access? I realize you need necessary expertise and skill sets, and that's progressively concentrated at larger firms. But you know, for a BJSS or others, the other 49 who didn't make the cut, are we? You know, is it a level playing field, or is it heavily tilted toward those who we've had historic relationships?
We did not consider the historical relationships when we evaluated. It was really based on what they could offer us going forward. And as I said, breadth and depth. So there were suppliers in the 49 that had more depth, but very, very specific breadth. And sometimes it wasn't enough for what we were looking for with these value contracts. And
as part of the review, are we grading the historic providers, and do we drop historic providers who don't meet our standards or who haven't delivered at an appropriate level?
I do think we review each time that we engage with those vendors, and I might ask if John Canal and SSM, if there's any formal process that we do with them. But they have, the ones that we've had, just so everybody knows, in the past are Deloitte, Ernst & Young, and Cognizant. And
yeah,
they have
a lot of brand names here, you know.
Yes, there are a lot of brand names.
Right. And historically, the brand names perform usually pretty well, I would add, but also the BJSS is a New York State small business, so we thought it might be a good opportunity to see if we could help grow that particular portfolio.
Yeah, and to me, that's a conscious effort that we need to continue to make. You know, it's
Correct.
Great opportunity. We're not, we need to enable growth, especially in small business, the minority sector, et cetera. That's part of what we can do is lift organizations up. So I want to ensure they've got the opportunity to compete. Doesn't mean Absolutely. They're going to win, but at least get them in the game. I mean, I think we have a responsibility to be very inclusive, literally and figuratively, as to, you know, how we, so that's why I want to ensure the other 49, you know, would tell me, yep, John, I got a fair shake. And I understand why I didn't make the cut, as opposed to, you know, it's open and shut. I mean, it's a formality, going through the motions, et cetera. So I want to ensure that, yeah, we're giving and creating an opportunity for those to, grow up, and we're supporting that as well. it
Mhm.
obviously can't compromise the quality of the work that we need, but do think we have a responsibility to enable that.
Could
And
not
you're
agree
telling
more.
me you're
Chairman, this
comfortable
is-
you're doing enough of that, or there's a pool of emerging organizations that we're at least creating opportunity for.
Yes, and we're also looking to see if we can set up some sort of a mentor protege in this particular field with some of the smaller firms to see if we can give them even bigger shake.
All right, music to my ears.
And actually, these firms can also utilize those more diverse suppliers and actually need to keep meeting our diversity goals.
Yeah,
So
even on a subcontract
they
basis.
will
or
subcontract, exactly.
create some expectations and all the rest of that. So I just want to ensure there's a conscious effort on our part to navigate and coordinate some of that, okay?
Yes.
Absolutely, there is, yes.
All right, Lori.
Yeah, thank you, John, and thank you, Lisa. And, just to echo that quickly, the relationship building, I think for the future is huge. So that tail end, like the 49 who didn't make it, if we can remain in communication, some brief form of communication about we received your RFP, but, next time, maybe this or that, something, I think would be really wonderful. Again, for that relationship building for the future. Now, going back to the supplier diversity goals, can you dive a little deeper into the MWBE aspect of it? Are we scoring at all? Are we proactively reaching out? If you could talk a little bit more about that, Lisa, I think it'd be very helpful.
Yeah, I think we have started to actually score and look at particularly, how we're doing with each of the vendors against these goals. Some of the scoring is new, right? And we're setting baselines for them. We're also looking to see who has taken exception with our diversity goals, with obviously the goal to have the least amount of exceptions possible. So there is just renewed focus on this. And we have a diversity fair that's coming up later in the fall where MWBEs, WBEs, all of them will be invited to it. And one of the things that I was anxious about was we award these value contracts is sort of, you mentioned it, relationships, right? Making sure that those vendors also know that these overall are being contracted with us and they may be able to come in as subcontractors. So it provides a new way to engage further and more broadly with those diverse suppliers. And having the metrics going forward too. So that's something that we are going to be reviewing with our SSM partners on a pretty quarterly basis, just to see. I've seen some initial results and we have some opportunities for sure to improve.
Thank you, Lisa. And if you could report back to us after the diversity fair, I think that would be really interesting to hear about that experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think, further to all of that, in general, I think we have, my view, responsibility, maybe a little bit too heavy-handed, but clearly an opportunity, to invest. I'm not saying we should be an incubator per se, or play a private equity role here or whatever, but anything we can do to either pair up, partner up, play a big brother, big sister role with some of these organizations. I think it's really important so that as we look 3 to 5 years down the road, we're part of the reason why there's a larger pool of qualified candidates, that it's not just the big guys, et cetera, et cetera. So let's make sure, we continue to lean into all of that.
Yeah, I think at the next board meeting, I think we're going to have a presentation that's going to show you some of the programs that we're embarking on that I think will meet that exact challenge.
Okay, all right, great, John, appreciate that. Unless there's any other questions for Lisa, I'd ask for a motion to recommend approval of this item to the full board next week. Motion, please.
So moved by Wheelock.
Thanks, Laurie. Have a second?
Second by Cusick.
Thanks, Michael. Unless there's any other questions, all in favor? Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you.
Look forward to continuing the dialogue.
Absolutely.
All right, same church, different pew. Garish, you're up. with similar contract awards in the transmission planning and grid enhancement space.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, trustees, staff, and guests. I'm Phil Toya.
You're Phil,
Garish
not
had a
Garish.
last-minute conflict, so
Yeah, where's Garish?
I'm presenting this
Fucking
morning.
run
No. Next slide, please. So similar to the last discussion, we are looking at recommending for approval 7 5-year transmission planning and grid enhancement consultant service value contracts to the consultants listed here. Similar process, looking at establishing these value contracts for a basket of suppliers that we can mini bid for these services to support business development in the competitive projects, but also support NYPA utility operations and system planning studies for ongoing activities in the transmission business. We are looking at these 7 project or consultants. We had a solicitation issued in January of 2023. 23 proposals were submitted. The evaluation committee looked at the proposals and is recommending these 7 contracts for award. They looked at technical capabilities particular to the New York market. The transmission services that we're looking for obviously are focused on the New York market. We were looking for consultants that have experience in the New York market, also looking at a broad spectrum for system planning studies, including economic analysis and grid enhancement technologies. So looking at those services that they can provide. Also looking at the key personnel that they are offering up for these services. And again, this breadth of contracts is necessary so that the resources, given the competitive landscape, sometimes there are conflicts. We need to make sure that we have a basket of providers so that we're not blocked out of providers that our competitors may be using, as well as the availability of resources. This market is very competitive with all of the work going on, so we need to make sure that we have a number of contractors on board so that for time, expediency, and technical competence, that we have a basket of providers that can meet our needs. So we're looking for board approval, subject to finalization of the terms and conditions for these contracts. I'll now take any questions.
Talk to the same questions that we just ran Lisa through, Phil. In terms of the 7, are there any new firms here? The 16 who didn't make the cut, would they say it's a level playing field? What are we doing to enable growth? The same conversation we just had with her. Talk to us a bit about what we're doing, you or John, from a process standpoint, how we're enabling, supporting, some other firms.
Sure. Yeah, my understanding now, business development has not necessarily worked with all these contractors, but utility operations has in the past. They're the typical names in the field. Again, given the unique position we're in, focused on New York, we do need experience in the New York market to ensure that the consultants are easily able to get up and running with the system planning studies and the economic analysis. So looking at this typical group of consultants, I would say that, yeah, it is a level playing field. Again, looking at the particulars for New York, we need that experience. We need strong technical capabilities, as well as availability of staff that can meet these needs. Again, the system planning, economic analysis in the competitive market is it's a competitive market for the employees. So making sure they have adequate staff and can meet our needs. As far as the MWBE and service disabled veteran-owned businesses, we work with SSM to ensure that our goals are met. Again, this is a competitive market. I defer to John on particulars in that, but we do work with them, especially going through the mini bid process, to make sure that our requirements are met.
Are the 16 that didn't make it, are they just flat out not qualified? Or are some number of the 16 qualified, but we've chosen not to include them as potential bidders in our basket?
I think when you look at this, again, the particulars with focusing on the New York market, some bidders don't have experience there. And then again, the size and breadth of their experience in the New York market, I would say these are the top candidates. And again, typically the firms that we have worked with that are able to provide those services on a competitive basis, as well as from a technical competency standpoint. And I believe some were not able to.
But I mean,
I
so
believe
if
some
I'm-
of them also were not able to meet the discussion on the terms and conditions for our that we're looking for the services.
Again, I'm just trying to ensure we're appropriately inclusive.
Right, in this particular area, Chairman, it's really kind of hard for the MWBE space because it's such a centralized field, right? So the seven awardees, one of which is a New York State small business. We are cognizant of trying to bring in a small business to help us with some of this work. But it's a limited field, and typically these type of contracts are exempt from the MWBE goals because of that challenge.
All right. Well, but even be inclusive literally and or figuratively, I mean, I'm hard pressed to believe 16 firms applied knowing they weren't qualified. So I'm just trying to understand what the cut is. Did we determine the other 16 weren't qualified and we just don't want to do business with them? Or, again, I'm always sensitive to perceptions and the optics when we're fishing in a broader pool and we just keep going back to the same players. Accept the reality of that, but want to ensure we're enabling, given the significance of the investments that we're otherwise making.
Okay, let's go back and we'll take a look and we'll report back.
Okay. Other questions for Phil? If not, I'd ask for a motion to recommend approval of this item to us as a full board next week.
Trustee Warren makes a motion, Chairman.
Thanks, Louis. Have a second?
Seconded by Wheelock.
Okay, thank you. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any
Aye.
opposed? Motion carried. All right, thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
Tell Garish we missed him. All right, our last official item on the discussion agenda is a review of the outcomes of labor negotiations with the union relative to Canal employees. Eric.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Good morning to the trustees, EMC staff, and the public. On June 30th, 2022, the Public Employees Federation PEF Unit 5 collective bargaining agreement with the Canal Corporation expired, resulting in our need, obviously, to negotiate a new contract. The negotiating committees of Canal Corp and PEF reached an agreement on April 17th, 2023, subject to the union ratification by the membership. That was done ratified on July 21st, 2023. There's 74 PEF employees. It's a 5-year agreement, 60-month agreement. And the highlights from the contract, retroactive 3% wage increase to July 1st, 2022 for active employees after the ratification date, and then 3% GWI annually beginning July 1st, 2023 through July 1st, 2026. And upon full board approval, $1,000 lump sum payment will be made to all active employees, 74 people. Payments will be made from the operating fund, and they're consistent with the authority's long-term financial forecast. Just some brief highlights. There was some modifications in dental coverage, negotiation of the paid parental leave, increase in meal allowance and operation and water management stipends, consistent rate for retirees for the cost of medical coverage. And then the formal edition of Juneteenth. Juneteenth is already being recognized, but it was formally added to the CBA going forward.
And these outcomes reasonably consistent with our other union agreements, Eric?
Yes, they are.
Okay. What's the overall dynamic between us and the union here? You put it in the healthy and positive end of the curve, or? is it-
Yeah, I would say negotiations with PAF went very well. It was very productive, and it didn't get hostile in any capacity. And I thought we worked great. A lot of the teams were new to the table, and I felt like it was a good, solid relationship with PAF.
All right, terrific. Any questions for Eric from anyone? Lori's got her hand up, sorry.
No worries. Thank you, John. Thank you, Eric. I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes learning more about the paid parental leave. And I think, if we could broaden that it's not just this, contract, but if it's similar, I think that would be very helpful. Can you start by explaining what the existing PAF paid parental leave program looks like?
So currently, paid family leave was introduced by the governor back in 2016. And the paid parental leave was an enhancement of the benefit. And it was originally for management confidential employees, basically non-union employees. So in January and March of this year, we were asked, or we took the initiative to negotiate with the union this benefit. And so it actually went pretty smooth. There weren't a lot of questions, but we negotiated the paid parental leave into the contract.
Okay, and how many employees potentially does this affect?
Well, there's 74 total employees in PAF, and just looking at the analysis of the composition of the staff, it didn't appear to affect a large number of their employees. But again, trying not to be presumptuous, but it didn't seem to impact them greatly. Some of our other larger unions that have 300, 400, 500 people, it would affect them differently.
Okay. I really appreciate that. I think this is a topic I'm very interested in as far as our CBAs going forward. So I just wanted to note that and, just see if any of my fellow trustees have questions, but thank you. I appreciate the additional information.
And I'm sure there's probably other enhancements that will come, from the governor's office for sure.
Excellent. Thank you.
Anything else for Eric? All right, I'm glad, good outcome, positive dynamic. Well done, Eric. Appreciate the good work to achieve a constructive resolution for all. So with that, I'd ask for a recommendation, or motion to recommend this item for approval at full board next week. Motion,
made by
please.
Cusick.
Thanks,
Motion.
thanks, Michael. Can I have a second?
Second, Warren.
Thank you, Louis. Unless there's any other questions, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you.
All right. Before I ask for a motion to move the consent agenda, just in the spirit of transparency, Adam, the first item, continuation of the discussions we've been having. While I realize the current ask of 10 million is under our consent threshold, the aggregate of 17.5 is over. Can you just talk a couple minutes? I'm asking you, since you're identified as our Q&A person on this one. Can you just give us a little bit of recap, given the conversations that we just had about the other two contract approvals relative to this request as well?
Sure. I mean, this is really for the financial, expanding the value of the contracts for financial advisors, and this goes back, started 4 years ago. So we're coming to the point where we're exhausting the money that was authorized under that particular authorization. So we're extending it out primarily to cover certain projects such as Propel, where we're going to be engaging and needing financial advisory support, as well as the ongoing support around the Clean Path project, and some of the other big projects. It was part of a much broader selection of firms. So there was a good wide variety of firms, including some MWBEs in that selection. And the other advisors have been asked to utilize MWBEs as a sub if and where it's practical. So we do find opportunities occasionally where it's practical. Like I was mentioning before, I mean, not under this particular authorization, but when we actually sell the bonds, our bond syndicate is made up of a significant representation of MWBEs. Approximately 30% of the compensation will go to MWBE firms. So we do utilize them there. We also require, when we're executing trades with with broker dealers on our investment portfolio, we have a minority and women-owned business requirement there as well, that those trades be done primarily with MWBE firms and veteran-owned firms as well. Want to include that as well. We do use veteran-owned firms and part of that mix. So we try to attain those or exceed those goals in every opportunity that we have.
Okay. And again, the opportunity for others to crack the lineup here, you know, is there, back to the level playing field and the optics of all of that. We're doing all the right things to enable that, acknowledging the special expertise required here.
Yes, we do that in a number of different ways. Also in terms of, you know, like I said, for the bond syndicate, where there's requirements for certain ways that the deals would be underwritten, where it would require significant capital or other requirements that may not be as easily attained by MWBEs. We've done it in such a way that we've removed some of those barriers and made it more accessible for those firms to participate by removing some of those barriers. And we try to do that throughout. So as John Canal was mentioning, you know, we meet constantly with firms, you know, broadly to identify what they see are the barriers to entry and what we can do to remove them, whether it be in this space or, as we were talking about, engineering or consultants, et cetera. Sometimes it might be insurance requirements. We've looked at that in the construction area as well for engineering firms. You know, when we went to a owner-controlled insurance program where we hold the insurance, that removed a significant barrier of entry to those kind of firms to participate. So that's one of the things we constantly look for. And when we have these industry days with all MWBE firms looking to business with us, we ask them to tell us what do they see as preventing them from being able to compete for more business here. We also do a lot of what I call matchmaking, where we bring together prime contractors with potential MWBEs and try to link those together so that they know where to find each other when they're trying to make those requirements. So if we say a prime has got to have 20% or more participation, and they say, well, they may not be able to find or access those firms, we try to look for firms that we have approved or have been approved by New York State and make those firms, you know, known and available to the prime contractors so that we can say to them, look, here's a list of people that either we've done business with before or have been approved to do business with us. You should really make, you know, a significant effort to include them in your work. So I think
Okay.
we've made a lot of strides there.
All right, appreciate that. That's one of 3 items in the consent agenda. Fellow committee members, hopefully you've had an opportunity to review. Anyone have any other questions relative to any of the items in the consent agenda? If not, I'd ask for a motion to adopt the consent agenda as presented.
Cusick,
Motion.
make the motion.
All right, Lori, Michael, I'll let Karen
Thank you,
sort out.
Michael.
All right, Michael's got it. Lori's on backup. Well done. Appreciate that. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? The consent agenda is adopted. Unless there's anything else to come before us, I'd like to state our next scheduled finance committee is middle of November, November 14th, per the notes here. And with that, thank everyone for their participation and attendance, and would ask for a motion to close the meeting. Collective motion.
Motion to
Someone,
close.
please.
Motion
So
to
moved,
close.
Michael. Second.
Seconded by
There's a
Wheelock.
second in there. All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? All right, motion carried, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time, effort, and energy as always. Look forward to seeing all of you next week up in Rochester. A good celebration of the work in general being done there, and Canals in particular. Have a great day. Enjoy.